This is the story of the greatest organizational turnaround in military history and the doctrine it created. It's about what becomes possible when existential crisis forces organizations to abandon comfortable lies and embrace brutal truths. This is how you transform catastrophe into dominance. At 3:15 a.m. on June 22, 1941, 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border in the largest invasion in human history. Within 6 months, the Soviet Union would lose 4 million soldiers, 20,000 tanks, and control of territories containing 63 million people. And yet, less than 4 years later, Soviet forces would be raising the red flag over Reichstag in Berlin. This is the story of the greatest organizational turnaround in military history and the doctrine it created. Most people think the Soviets won through human waves and overwhelming numbers, but that's propaganda. The real story is about operational art, industrial logistics, and how existential crisis forced doctrinal innovation. Operation Barbarossa wasn't just big, it was unprecedented. 3.5 million Axis troops, 3,000 tanks, 2,000 aircraft, attacking along an 1,800-mile front. In the first week, German forces advanced 200 miles, destroying 4,000 Soviet aircraft, most on the ground, and killed, captured, or wounded 600,000 Red Army troops. By December 1941, the numbers were staggering. 4 million Soviet casualties, 3 million starving in German POW camps. Most would not survive. 20,000 tanks destroyed or captured. The encirclement at Kiev alone netted 700,000 Soviet POWs, 4 entire armies. At Vyazma, another 600,000. These weren't just defeats, they were erasures of entire military formations. By October, German forces were at the gates of Moscow. Leningrad was encircled. The territories under German occupation contained 85% of Soviet aircraft production, 9 of 11 tank factories, 70% of all coal production. By any rational measure, the Soviet Union should have collapsed. On June 24, 1941, just 2 days after the invasion, the Council for Evacuation was formed. On July 4th, they issued the order, "Move Soviet industry east." All of it. It was improvisation at the scale of a continental empire, executed while German armies were advancing 50 miles per day. Between July and November 1941, Soviet authorities relocated 1,523 large industrial enterprises, major factories. Each one had to be dismantled, loaded onto railroad cars, transported hundreds or thousands of miles east, then reassembled and restarted, all while the Wehrmacht was destroying Soviet armies in the field. There were 16 million people, workers, engineers, their families. They moved east with the factories. Entire industrial ecosystems were transplanted across a continent. The Kirov factory in Leningrad, the famous Putilov works, was moved lock, stock, and barrel to the Urals. One Ukrainian tank factory was dismantled, relocated, rebuilt in the Urals, and delivered its first shipment of 25 tanks in early December. 3 months from the evacuation to production. By the end of 1942, the results were undeniable. The Soviets built 6,200 tanks in 1941 during the chaos of invasion and evacuation. In 1942, they built 24,639 tanks, a 393% increase. In the Urals alone, military production increased 180% compared to 1941. In Volga, 200%. This was industrialization on steroids, achieved while fighting in the largest land war in history. By summer of 1942, the Soviets had the industrial capacity. What they needed was operational competence. That test came at Stalingrad. The battle for Stalingrad lasted from July of 1942 to February of 1943. It was the bloodiest battle in human history. 2 million casualties. The entire city reduced to rubble. German Sixth Army, the elite formation that had smashed through France in 1940, was locked in street-to-street fighting with Soviet defenders. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. This was precision operational art. The Soviet plan targeted weak Romanian armies protecting the German flanks. Within 4 days, by November 22nd, the northern and southern Soviet forces linked up at Kalach. 290,000 Axis personnel were now trapped in the Stalingrad pocket. Hitler forbade breakout. The Luftwaffe promised to supply the pocket by air, but they failed. Relief attempts by German forces from outside the pocket failed. For 2 months, the Sixth Army withered in the encirclement. On February 2, 1943, the remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered, Germany's first field army to capitulate. Of 91,000 prisoners taken, only 5,000 would survive Soviet captivity and return home. Stalingrad was the application of deep operations doctrine, a concept Soviet theorists like Tukhachevsky and Issaron had developed in the 1930s, then suppressed during Stalin's purges, now reborn through necessity. Deep operations aim to strike the enemy's entire operational depth simultaneously. Frontline troops, reserves, headquarters, and logistics. Not attrition warfare, not human waves. Operational art designed to collapse enemy systems. The Soviet turnaround validates the framework of learn fast, fail quick, and dominate slow. They learned fast from June to December of 1941 as the Barbarossa catastrophe revealed doctrinal failures, initiated industrial evacuation immediately, studied German operational methods under fire. They failed quick. Kharkov offensive disaster in May of 1942. 277,000 casualties, multiple failed counteroffensives, rapid iteration on tactical and operational approaches. They dominated slow from 1943 to 1945. Stalingrad in February of 43, operational art mastery. In Kirks of July 1943, defensive doctrine matured. Operation Bagration in June of 1944 was deep operations at scale, 1,500-mile advance to Berlin. From 4 million casualties to destroying German army groups, from losing 20,000 tanks to producing them faster than they could be destroyed, from operational incompetence to operational art that NATO studies to this day. The lesson isn't about Soviet ideology or authoritarian control. It's about what becomes possible when existential crisis forces organizations to abandon comfortable lies and embrace brutal truths. Total collapse enabled total transformation. Your organization probably doesn't face an existential military threat, but the doctrine remains. When you learn fast from failures, iterate quickly on solutions, and apply mastered principles systematically, you don't just survive the crisis. You dominate what comes after. This is learn fast, fail quick, dominate slow. Click subscribe, ring the bell, so you'll be notified for the next chapter.